these trees are strange. Every single one of them bent in exactly the same way. And no one, not even the locals, knows who or what did it. This just might be the world's strangest forest. Perhaps one of the world's greatest mysteries is the origin of a place in Poland known as the Crooked Forest. Its unique form has baffled people for nearly a century, and the reason for its mystery is likely tied to the tragedies of World War II. It all began in the year 1928, 11 years before the start of the war. We believe people planted these trees, but for what purpose, we're not sure. Regardless of the reason why they were planted, though, this was the beginning of a pine tree grove of around 400 trees. Or at least that's what some people think. Some say this forest has 400 trees, but there are others that say this is only a myth, a dramatization of the forest, because the Crooked Forest truly has only around 80 trees. I found this discrepancy fascinating because there is an obvious and stark difference between 400 trees and 80 trees. But for some reason, the objective, indisputable truth hasn't come out online yet. So unless we go over to the Crooked Forest ourselves and count, we can't know how many there are for sure. But most sources say there are about 400 trees. So for the purposes of this video, we're gonna go with that. These trees grew normally for about a decade until something caused them to begin bending. Each and every one curves in exactly the same way. The curve begins at the same points in their trunks and goes on to become a 3 to 9 foot sideways bow pointed towards the north. Then the war began, and in the hardship and changes that came with it, whoever planted these trees disappeared. The entire surrounding area wound up empty. Everyone who had settled there had either left or was driven out, and this means that they took the secrets of the Crooked Forest with them. The forest had been abandoned, and anybody who knew the story of its origin was no longer around to tell it. But these trees proved to be resilient. In the decades that followed, they continued to grow and thrive. Their curved distortion left each tree with only one functional branch, but this branch managed to do the job of many and support the whole organism. Today, some of these trees stand as much as 50 feet tall. Of course, humans love trying to solve a good mystery, so there have been many theories as to how the Crooked Forest came to be. There are a broad range of theories, ranging from aliens to gravitational fluctuation, to Nazi tanks rolling over the trees, to intentional human intervention, and that's just the beginning. There are many more. But there are two theories that are perhaps the most likely. The first is a natural explanation, that heavy snow weighed the trees down when they were still quite young, and this caused them to grow crookedly at the base. This explanation, while it does make sense in some ways, also beckons a couple of questions. For starters, why were only these trees in the Crooked Forest affected and not all of the other trees in the surrounding area? The Crooked Forest is surrounded by a lot of other pine trees that don't have this peculiar bend. Maybe this was due to the age of the trees. Because all the Crooked Forest trees were planted at the same time, maybe when the snowfall hit, they were still young and malleable enough to be bent by the snowfall, but all the other trees in the area were big enough that this didn't affect them. While I do think there certainly could be some validity to this theory, the second one is really the one that I think is the most plausible. This theory states that the people who planted the Crooked Forest actually manipulated these trees on purpose. Perhaps this was to bend the wood and prepare it to make furniture or even boats. Still, the timeline for this is uncertain, because if the trees were planted around 1928, would the people who planted them have had enough time to mold them before they disappeared? I think yes, it's very likely that they did have enough time, but that's just my best guess. And before we decide for certain that it was humans who made the Crooked Forest, I would like to leave you with one piece of information that kind of threw a wrench in it for me. Cook pine trees are a fascinating organism with a unique and baffling ability. They point towards the equator, meaning that in the northern hemisphere they lean towards the south, and in the southern hemisphere they lean towards the north. Which, side note, I thought this was insanely cool. Anyway, cook pine trees seem to be the only type of pine tree, or really any type of tree, with an affinity for the equator like this. We don't know why they do this either. We think there could be some complex gravitational, magnetic, or astrological phenomena at work. While the pine trees in the crooked forest are not the cook pine trees I just talked about, this unique property of the cook pine tree does show us that nature is always surprising us. And even when we think we know everything there is to learn about our world, something new comes to light, and we realize that there is more going on around us than we can ever imagine. So, what do you think? Did the crooked forest form because of people, snow, or a new and unexplained phenomena entirely? If you'd like to know the story of another fascinating forest, I would highly recommend checking out my video on the redwoods, which you can click right here. While not as eerie, the redwood trees have their own share of secrets and fascinating tales. If you like this video, please go ahead and leave a like down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.